One of the things I've learned over the years as a photographer that's really stuck with me is that sometimes the best photos that you shoot are the ones that you don't plan for. It's the unexpected shots that you see when you're out and about, the small in-between moments that most people would completely walk by or overlook, but you notice it and you capture that thing in a beautiful way. And a lot of the time, these moments happen when you least expect them to, when you're out getting coffee with a friend in the morning, or you're on an afternoon walk around your neighborhood. And that's exactly why over the last few years, I've started carrying a small personal camera with me every time I leave the house. Just a small camera that I can throw in my bag that takes great photos and that I can use to document my life with or capture beautiful little scenes when I'm out and about. And over the last few weeks, that camera has been the brand new OM system OM-3, a camera that not only looks beautiful and has this gorgeous timeless design, but is also incredibly functional as well, and also incredibly tiny. I can throw this in my bag, venture out, and just use it to document my life or capture things when I'm out and about. So in this video, I want to talk about my experience shooting with this camera over the last few weeks, show you guys a ton of photos that I've been shooting here in northern Thailand, and also talk about who this camera is for. Now, full transparency, OM System is sponsoring this video, so I'm just going to talk about my experiences shooting with this camera, talk about some of the things that I like, some of the things that I don't like, and you guys can decide whether or not it's right for you. Now, there's a few requirements that I have for a personal everyday camera. And at the very top of that list, it needs to be a small and compact body that looks good and that I can take pretty much anywhere. I'm not the guy that's gonna venture out with a giant Sony camera every time I wanna go for a walk in the afternoon. If you're one of those people, that's totally fine. But for me, I want something that's just gonna stay out of the way, that I can throw in my bag, that looks cool, that can elevate my outfit. And the OM-3 is definitely that camera. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's got this beautiful aluminum design to it. It's very well made, like it feels solid in the hand, but it weighs less than 500 grams. So this camera's not gonna get in your way, and I can just throw it in my little man purse that I carry with me every day, and it doesn't even feel like the camera's there. So that is a huge highlight for this camera, is the size and the design of it. But a lot of cameras will pursue that really classic timeless design, and they'll neglect the actual functionality of the camera. And that's one of the things that I love about the OM-3, is it still has this timeless classic design, but you don't sacrifice usability with the camera. It has a ton of different dials on the top. We have a dial on the top that we can use to switch between photo, video, and S&Q mode. We have a ton of different custom modes on the top of the camera, a dedicated record button, as well as several different dials that we can use to change our shutter speed and our aperture. And that's one thing that I really didn't like about the Fuji X100V, is you really can't shoot that photo in full manual. It's not practical. But with this camera, you can, because you still maintain all of those dials that are functional when you're shooting in manual mode. And it's weather sealed on top of that. It's IP53 rating, so you can take it out into the rain, into the snow, whatever. As long as you're not completely submerging this camera, it's going to be fine in most scenarios, which is nice for a camera that you want to take out with you and you don't want to have to worry about. So while this camera is perfect as an everyday shooter in an urban environment, for example, especially with a lens like this, the 17mm f1.8, which is fantastic, you could slap the new 100-400 lens on it and go out and you have a very functional wildlife or landscape photography camera as well. And I did take this camera out to shoot some landscapes here in northern Thailand. Unfortunately, there's not all that many beautiful landscapes here in northern Thailand, but I felt like this camera would be totally fine in any of those scenarios. And I was super stoked with some of these photos that I got of the buffalo here just outside of Chiang Mai. But let's talk about some of the functionality of this camera beyond just its build quality. And before I get into the image quality and all that, one of my favorite features about this camera, and something that's incredibly important for me in an everyday camera, are JPEGs that look good out of camera. And the OM-3 has this brand new creative dial on the front of the camera that you can use to switch between several different creative modes that edit the JPEGs in camera, so you get really good looking JPEGs directly out of camera and you don't have to edit the RAWs, which for me in an everyday camera, I don't want to have to edit the RAWs every time I go out for a photo walk on a random Tuesday afternoon. So I like having good looking JPEGs, and there's several different modes on that creative dial. The first one is mono, and you have 4 different black and white color profiles that you can choose from. Within those, you can customize them even more. You can customize the curves, you can edit the brightness of specific colors, and you can also add film grain in there as well. But my personal favorite is the color creative mode on this camera, which gives you 4 different color presets that you can edit and customize to get the perfect look for your style. And I played around with this for a few days and got a style dialed in that I absolutely love directly out of camera. It's got these beautiful warm highlights, deep blacks, and also soft highlights as well. And you can completely customize this in the color mode menu. So you can customize the saturation of each of the main colors. You can also adjust the curves directly in camera. You can add a vignette if you wanted to. You can adjust the sharpness and the contrast as well. And I believe you will actually be able to share and download these custom settings that you can upload to your camera. So for example, if I wanted to upload this, you can download it, import it into your camera, and have the same stylistic look that I use in my photos. And I spent some time dialing in this recipe, and I think they look absolutely fantastic, not just for street photography, which is what I've been shooting mostly, but also when I went out in nature and I shot some landscapes, those photos looked great and definitely fit the style of my photography. Now you can also switch that creative dial to the art mode as well. And in the art mode, you have some pretty creative, pretty crazy looking edits on those JPEG photos. And for me, these felt a little bit too strong and probably not something that I would use, but there might be situations where these could come in handy. And one of the things that I do like about this is there are creative frames that you can use, so you can make it look like it's an actual film photo that was scanned, for example, which, you know, might be cool for some people, probably not something that I would use. But the creative dial is definitely a major selling point for me because I love the fact that I can edit the images before I actually take them. So I dialed in my recipe, I can go out, I can shoot, and I can share those images and they're ready to go. And I don't have to spend any time editing the RAWs and diving into the editing process when I don't really want to have to do that with just an everyday personal camera. But now let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that's the fact that this camera has a micro Four Thirds sensor. The sensor on this camera is absolutely tiny, especially when you compare it to one of my full frame Sonys, for example. You can see the physical difference in the sensor size between these two cameras is massive. And that was probably my main concern when I picked up this camera. Is I've never really shot with a micro Four Thirds sensor before, so I was a little bit concerned that the image quality would be severely lacking. And yes, if you zoom into 500% on a micro Four Thirds sensor and compare that to a photo shot on a full frame sensor, you are going to notice that it's not going to have as much detail. But in 99% of scenarios, you really don't notice that loss of resolution that you get when you go down to a micro Four Thirds sensor. And there's also a lot of benefits to shooting with a micro Four Thirds sensor as well. The first of which being you get an incredibly deep depth of field without having to stop down all the way to f8 or f11 like you would have to on a full frame camera. I found that shooting between f4 and f5.6 on this camera yielded really deep depth of field to the front of the frame, to the back of the frame. So everything was a nice sharp focus, which is something that I've been doing a lot more with my photography over the last few years. Instead of taking the easy way out and shooting wide open at f1.8 and just blurring the background, I'm trying to incorporate scenes within the composition to add to that composition, and including secondary subjects and things like that. So I actually like the deep depth of field that you get with a micro Four Thirds sensor. And on top of that, that small sensor allows this camera to be nice and compact. And I would argue that having a small and compact everyday camera is much more important than having a camera that has the maximum resolution, for example. So I actually really like the fact that this camera has a micro Four Thirds sensor, and it really hasn't put me off. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I really do not notice a huge difference between the micro Four Thirds photos and the full frame photos. As long as I'm not pixel peeping, these photos are beautiful and they're more than good enough to use for social media. You can print these images, they're 20 megapixel photos, they look great, and they're incredibly versatile. Now for me personally, all the things that we've discussed in this video so far are the most important things in an everyday camera. I just want it to take good photos, I want it to be fun to shoot with, I want it to be quick and small. And so far the OM-3 hits all of those things, but the OM-3 is a flagship in disguise, and it has a ton more features within it that make it an incredibly powerful camera that goes beyond just shooting, you know, random photos of trash cans when you're out and about, like what I've been doing. And at the top of that list is the computational photography button that comes on the back of the camera. And if you hit that button, you can switch between a few different computational modes that are all done in camera. You have a live ND filter that goes up to 32 stops, which you can use to get long exposures, for example. You also have a graduated ND filter, which is really cool. I've never seen this in a camera before, but if you're shooting a high contrast scene, for example, and you want to darken the sky, but you want to keep the foreground and the midground in a good exposure as well, you can drag that graduated filter down over the top of your sky and you get a nice balanced exposure, which is incredibly useful for those high contrast landscape scenes. And I used that when I was shooting those buffaloes and got some really cool images using that graduated ND filter. Now you also have an HDR mode in there and a high resolution mode, so you can shoot 50 megapixel photos if you're hand holding your camera, or 80 megapixel photos on a tripod, which is cool if you want a little bit more resolution in your image. And last but certainly not least is the video capabilities of this camera. Now me personally, I don't think I would use video on a camera like this all that much. I just want a simple everyday shooter that's really easy and fun to shoot with, but the fact that it does have video is nice. And if you wanted to capture some clips while you're out and about, you want to shoot some B-roll for your YouTube video, this camera is fantastic for that. It shoots up to 4K, 60 frames per second, 10-bit in log, which I think looked really nice, and it was pretty easy to grade as well. And I just shot some clips around town. Like I said, I don't think I would use this camera all that much for video, but the fact that it does have a flippy screen means that you could use this as a video camera. It really does have all the capability of a flagship camera in a beautiful little timeless design. And I think that's really what OM System was going for with this camera. They wanted a cool little camera that can compete with something like the Fuji X100V, but still retains a ton of functionality, making this camera a legitimate tool, not just a toy that you throw in your bag, but an actual photography tool that captures great photos, has beautiful image quality, and is just fun to shoot with. Now, in terms of the price, this camera is going to retail for $2,000 US, and the 17mm f1.8 lens is going for $549 as well. Now, that is a lot of money to spend on a camera like this, but if you actually look at the functionality of this camera and you look beyond just its timeless film design, this camera is incredibly capable. It can keep up with you no matter what you're doing. You can use it as an everyday personal camera like me, where you're just going out and you're documenting your life, or you could use it as a legitimate expedition camera. You could take this thing to Antarctica and it's going to keep up with you. So I love the versatility of a camera like this that looks good, but is also highly functional. So I'm a big fan of this little camera. I'm definitely going to be using it as my everyday personal camera for the foreseeable future. I think there's a lot more that I can learn about this camera, but I just wanted to share my experiences with you guys in this video and show you some of the images that I've been shooting with it. But I hope you guys found this video useful, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think about the OM System OM-3. Let me know in the comments down below what you think about this cool little camera, and I'll chat with you guys down there. But thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you very soon in the next one.